Today is April 3rd, 2026, and I'm gonna touch on the conflict in the Middle East. I brought the issue to the Lord, and I was led to Acts chapter 2, verse 5, where it says, "And there were dwelling at Jerusalem Jews, devout men, out of every nation under heaven." Out of every nation under heaven. So there were people who came from all over and became Jews. Because when you're being a Jew, it's of the spirit. Abraham had faith and he believed God, right? And so to have faith, that is to be of the spirit, right? So you can become a Jew if you believe, right? And you can become a Messianic Jew or Christian if you believe. But with the Torah, it touches on, the promise for Isaac, and what he would acquire, or his descendants would acquire, the land that they would be in. But people could come in from all nations, and if they wanted to be a Jew, you can come in. And you can see that throughout the history of Israel with the example of Rahab. So what I get from that is that about 2026 years ago, Jerusalem, right, back then was filled with people from all different nations. And I'm going to read from verse 5 to 11 to show you also some of the nations that were recorded being in Jerusalem at the time. "And there were dwelling at Jerusalem Jews, devout men out of every nation under heaven. Now when this was noised abroad, the multitude came together and were confounded, because that every man heard them speak in his own language. And they were all amazed and marveled, saying one to another, Behold, are not all these which speak Galileans? And how hear we every man in our own tongue, wherein we were born? Parthians, and Medes, and Elamites, and the dwellers in Mesopotamia, and in Judea, and Cappadocia, in Pontus, and Asia, Phrygia, and Pamphylia, in Egypt, and in the parts of Libya, about Cyrene, the strangers of Rome, Jews and proselytes, Cretes and Arabians. We do hear them speak in our tongues the wonderful works of God." So when the Spirit of God came upon them, they spoke as the Spirit gave utterance. These were Jews that believed in Christ, so they could be called Messianic Jews. And so when they were speaking, the other nations who were there, and many of them that were Jews, heard them. And you can see that between verse 9 and 11, there were many nations in there. So a lot of Jerusalem, or people in Israel, in that region, they're mixed. Okay? They're mixed. And you're going to hear a little bit more about other nations they were mixed with, like further confirmation that they were mixed. And remember, one of the things that happened throughout um, the history of that region, Israel, or that region, is that um, whenever they were disobedient, for example, when they weren't keeping the Sabbaths, then they were exiled to go into Babylon for about 70 years. And then what would happen is sometimes they would go back into what we would call present day Israel. So there was a back and forth with these people. So they're mixed. They're mixed Persian, mixed, well, present day Persia is Iran. They're mixed Iranians. They're mixed, mixed people. And, you know, whenever they were disobedient, and that happened several times, oftentimes they were ousted from the land, but there was sometimes left a remnant. And so they would be ousted and sometimes they would come back. So before we get into the German Jews or European Jews that came back after World War II, let's just touch on just a few things that happened in their history, right? Okay, so Matthew 24, verse 2. It says, "And Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily, I say unto you that there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down." And verse 1 talks about, "And Jesus went out and departed from the temple. And his disciples came to him for to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you that there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down." And between about 63 to 70 AD, there was a revolt in Judea against the Romans. And the Romans destroyed the second temple of Jerusalem. And then under Nero, they said this happened about 64 AD. There was persecution of the Christians. And remember, Christians are Jews. You can call them Messianic Jews, but a Christian is just a follower of Christ. And Christ Jesus was a Jew, right? Many of them were Jews. They fled to neighboring countries, okay? Like present day Turkey, they say, they would call it Anatolia, right? And they fled to Mesopotamia and all those nations. So Jews scattered or fled to neighboring countries during revolts against the Romans, because that's what happens during war. Look at today. Many Ukrainians left and fled Ukraine, right? Some of them are in Scotland. Some of them are wherever in Africa. Even Russians, some of them didn't want to be drafted, so they fled Russia during the Ukraine and Russian war. In the Middle East, when the situation between Hamas and Israel, many of those people who identify as Palestinians fled. And throughout their history, with the back and forth that they go through, some would flee to the neighboring countries, such as Egypt, or to Yemen, Okay. So that happens when a war goes on. People are displaced, and you see that, right? So you can understand that in the Middle East, when there were revolts against the Romans, Jews more than likely fled the area to neighboring countries. The fall of the Roman Empire was completed in 476 AD by that's the western side. That's no that's pretty much the fall of the Roman Empire. Um it started the western part of the Roman Empire started to fall with Visigoth, I think in 410 AD, but you can check that, double check that. But in 476 AD, under the German chieftain Odoacer, um, he caused the fall of the Roman Empire. Now, the eastern part of the Roman Empire continued under the Byzantine, right? And the Byzantine Empire fell to the Ottoman Turks, right? Ottoman Turkish Empire. And they had onslaughts going on in 1453. So this is all the way to 1453 now, right? AD. Now, the Ottoman Turks, right? The Turkish people. So you have the Byzantines and the Turks. Then the Ottomans came to the Ottoman Turkish Empire came to an end between 1917 and 1922. The British Empire took over at the end of World War I. Around this time, they called the region Palestine for some reason, right? Because there's so much evidence documented throughout history that this region is or was for the children of Israel, but you do have documented within the Torah that a Palestina did exist. Philistines did exist. Hittites, Jebusites, Canaanites did exist. Okay? But remember, Romans came in, Byzantine continued on, then the Ottoman Turks, and then before the Romans, whatever disobedience, there's a back and forth in the region. Babylonian Empire, Persian Empire, okay? So the region is really mixed, okay? And so being led to Acts 2, there during the time of Christ, I mean, there were people from a whole lot of nations there. But Palestina, it is in the Torah, but they had their punishment for whatever they did towards the children of Israel or Judah. But there's one part within the children of Israel, like the history in the Torah, it says the coast of Palestine, which I believe is probably present day Gaza or around that area. But God dealt with them in that area. And so the West Bank being called Palestine and this whole thing, no. But anyway, let's go forward. Now that we have the understanding that for some strange reason they call the whole region Palestine when there were Israeli Jews still there, existing there. But they had probably little settlements here and there. Because remember, a remnant would stay in Israel, a remnant would stay in Jerusalem. Wars would happen, but a remnant would stay sometimes. All right. So, moving forward, now that that's cleared up, then you have David Ben Gurion, right? And author James Balfour, that they're wishing for a Jewish homeland. In what they were calling during that time after World War One, present day, they called it Palestine for some reason. And then, for some strange reason, they're saying the Arabs, right? Now, remember this region, they're mixed. But they're saying the Arabs opposed because it would mean subjugation, right, of Arab Palestinians. Now, what was happening, I guess, between the Byzantine Empire and the Ottoman Turkish Empire reign, there was, the medieval ages, and you had Islam, and coming up in many regions, and then you had the Crusades going on. So it was like there's this war between, this war going on in Jerusalem, and the Christians are, and the Muslims were fighting, and something to that degree going on. And the Christians would go and they would fight for the Jews or whatever it is, and they were against, I guess you had this push against Islam taking over the Holy Land or Jerusalem back during the medieval time. And you can look up books, historical accounts on stuff that were written and they found during that time, what they experienced. Now, this is what I have a bone to pick with this, because not all those people who were Muslims in present day Israel or that region, they were not all Arabs. You have the Turkish Empire, you have all this fighting going on, and it spanned a whole lot of nations. And so many of those people within that region, they're not full-blown Arabs. And so not every Muslim is an Arab. And that's what I don't agree with them saying that. Maybe what would happen is that, I guess, the Arab nations that came about would disagree, but the people who were in that region, many of them are not full-blown Arabs. All right, we already went over the history of Israel. It's mixed, right? Even up to Jesus Christ, there were nations. There were what? Jews of every nation under heaven there. And Acts chapter 2 lists a few of those nations. So it's mixed. And if you were to do genetic testing, you'll find out that a lot of those people who call themselves Arabs or Muslims, they're mixed. They're not full-blown Arabs. Not every Arab is a Muslim. Not every Muslim is an Arab. But they had also, like, I think your man would connect with a certain nation like Egypt, and they would call it the Arab whatever. But a lot of Egypt is mixed, and with Syrians, because remember wars would happen and all that kind of Turkish people. So no, let's be real about it. So what I would bring up is the Quran, um 5 verse 21. And this is Moses talking, because this is what you have to understand, and this is what's going to be pivotal to actually bringing forth peace in the Middle East, is the understanding that a lot of what is written in the Quran is from Muhammad reading the Torah or the New Testament. So anybody that reads the Torah, right, and follow whatever is written in there and believes in it and believes in the God of Abraham and of Isaac. And remember, Allah is the Arabic word for, I guess the English translation, you would say the God, right? And the God that they're talking about is the God of Abraham and of Isaac, one God. And the Hebrew word or Jewish people would believe in the God of Abraham and of Isaac. So if they're doing the same thing, isn't Islam a form of Judaism? Hello? If I think it's the Quran 3, I don't know if it's 3 verse 15 or 3 verse 45, but you can Google it or you can look into it, where Muhammad says Jesus is the Messiah and a prophet. Now, to acknowledge that he had to read or had some experience with Jesus or learn about Jesus reading the New Testament, right? And the Old Testament to call him the Messiah. Yes. Jesus is a Jew. He didn't come to tear down the law, but he fulfilled it. The only reason why many of those Jews did not receive him is because in all thy getting, get understanding, they could not see the spiritual aspect of what Jesus was saying or doing. Remember, it's in there. Eyes but cannot see, ears but cannot hear, a heart to understand but cannot perceive. So they rejected Jesus because they couldn't get on board with what he was saying. They couldn't see how it was harmless and it was still of the truth and pointing to him as the Messiah. And he came to what? Fulfill the law, not tear it down. So they rejected him, okay? Muhammad clearly, chapter 3, did not reject him because he calls him the Messiah. If you say these things and believe in the God of Abraham and of Isaac and have been reading the Torah in order to write parts of the Quran, what does that make you? Right? A Jew. But we have divisiveness and wars and this back and forth going on between Muslims and Jews. Why? Because remember, the Jews, if they don't understand you, they'll reject you. But a lot of Islam is Judaism. Look into it yourself. Am I become your enemy because I tell you the truth? Look into it yourself. How does the Quran have any story about Moses? and Abraham, and hello, Isaac. Now, this is the question that I have. Could there have been a small Israel, right? Could there have been a small Israeli state that would peacefully exist today in the region? Since many Muslims, or I would say Muslim Jews, existed in the region. Because during the, I believe, the Ottoman Turk Empire, there were Jews that were coming back, right? There were Jews that were coming back, and they would come back into present day Israel. And they would have little settlements. With this knowledge and understanding that Islam, which basically defines itself as a religion that if you submit to God, that's the only true way to find peace. Isn't that the same thing as Judaism? Isn't that the same thing as Christianity, which is Judaism? So it's all the same. Could they have all existed and found land that was not occupied and built up settlements there for the Israeli people and made a pitch to they call them Arab Palestinians, but the Muslims who were already there, mixed Turkish, Egyptian, Arabian, all sorts that were there. Could they have created this Judaic state where the Jewish Muslims and the Jews existed in one state? And I think it could have been done if they had this knowledge and understanding, if they looked into things and all that getting understanding. Remember, they rejected Jesus because they didn't understand him. They will reject Islam because they don't understand it. Could they have one state where both Muslims, people who would want to identify as Muslim, the Muslim Jews and the Jewish people could have existed in one state? I think it would have been possible. You know why? Because there's documentation where people who, before the 6-Day War, or who had descendants before, I guess, World War II or whatever, who basically remembered existing peacefully with the Muslims in the region. Because the push today for a Jewish homeland that will encompass Gaza, the Golan Heights, the West Bank, what are you going to do? You would cause these people who identify as Arab Palestinians to be displaced. Now, to cast people out of their homes, even to this present day, who are Muslims existing peacefully in the region, Muslim Jews, you would cause people to become angry. And I think that's where you have the development of the PLO, Al-Fatah, and then Al-Fatah became, developed into a Hamas eventually. And then you have this manifest creed of just hatred against those who identify as Israeli Jews in the region. And Many of them are brethren. So what happens when you cast people out of their homes? You're going to have bitterness, right? You're going to have someone that's angry, right? You're going to have people who they're not going to take that. They're going to fight for their home. Could these European Jews, German Jews that came into present day Israel, into the region, could they have actually, like the other Jews, create settlements for themselves within the region without kicking people out of their home? Because when you do that, you cause bitterness, right? Whatever you sow, that's what you reap. Now, Jesus came and said, love your neighbor as yourself. And back in the day, especially in Jesus' time, and even before, strangers existed in Israel, and they were supposed to treat them with kindness, considering that they themselves endured whatever in Egypt, right? This is what Jesus came to show them, the ways of the Spirit, which is love and peace. But they were rejecting it. And so, using police force to remove Muslim Jews out of their homes doesn't really equate to peace. You will reap corruption, right? If you sow to the flesh. So to continue on doing that, you basically cause a Hezbollah, a Hamas, an IRGC to be angry, and the Houthis to be angry, because these are people who, they love their Muslim brethren and they don't like the injustice, or they don't like the disrespect that would be done to them in order for Israel to achieve land or property in present day Israel. Could those European Jews or German Jews who wanted a homeland in Jerusalem, could they have entered there peacefully, finding plots of land, and in time and with patience and with financial assistance from whatever country, build up those places and have one Israel? Because you could bomb Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas. You can do those things. But if you continue to oust people, Muslim Jews, from their homes, you're still going to have hatred or anger being brewed within the region around you. So you may have an Israel, but will it ever be, will there ever be 20 years of peace like with King Solomon? Be real. You will reap what you sow. You sow in violence, you're going to reap violence. Violence begot violence. So this is pretty much what I have to say on this topic. I sought the Lord. many of those people who are in that region, they're not full-bred Jewish people. Many of them are mixed, especially considering their history. Many of those Muslims, they're not all Arabs. But you can have one Israel with Muslim Jews and the Hebrew or Judaic Jews, and with the Messianic Jews or Christians, whatever translation, Greek, English word, whatever it is, just they're worshiping the God of Abraham and of Isaac. Okay? I believe they can all exist there peacefully. But these set of Jews from Europe or the German Jews that came in, they don't represent all Jews all over the world. Please do understand that. Because there are many Jews who are melanated like I am because they migrated, right, across hot regions or across the equator area. And their descendants became melanated over time. And the Middle East is hot in and of itself, right? And so not all Jews are fair-skinned people. I mean, even when David, I think there was a situation where they had to look for a fair-skinned girl, I think for King David. So that goes to show if they have to look for it, not all those individuals, pardon me, who existed in the Middle Eastern region, not all of them are fair-skinned. Okay? You stay in the sun, you may become brown. Okay? So, be real. And then they were in Egypt, slaving away or in harsh conditions or under the hot sun for years. So these European or German Jews that wanted to escape the Holocaust and they came in, they don't represent all Israel. Not all Jews behave like that. Please do know that. And not all Jews agree with them being so aggressive and abusive and using force to cast Muslim Jews out of their homes. They could find land. I mean, even after the attack with Hamas and you see certain footage and you see all this land there, why are you casting them out of their homes? Hello? God sees. And then they want to get the U.S. involved. And cause all this. No. No. Let's be clear. What is the issue at hand? What's really going on? What Islam really is? What's the Arabic word for it? What are they doing? And just like Jesus said in Matthew 19, 1-9, Moses came up with the bill of divorcement because of the hardness of their hearts. Because God already told them, right? Mount Sinai, right? The 10 Commandments, do not commit adultery. But they still came up with excuses. Deuteronomy 24, 1-4. They'll still come up with things to commit adultery. Okay? Jesus came to a sinful and adulterous generation. God was never about the putting away. Malachi can tell you about it, right? It's not about the putting away. But remember, Israel backslided. And so the back and forth happened within the region. But there was a remnant, right? And remember, not all Jews are Jews. not all Israel is Israel. And there are Jews who say they are Jews, but Revelation 2 says they are of the synagogue, or they are the synagogue of Satan. Right? They're in Baal worship. They're not really Jews. Be aware of this. But you know what happens when someone is really traumatized and hurt by a loss of a loved one, especially in war? They may develop bitterness and hatred towards whatever nation killed them, failing to see the big picture during their time of loss because they're angry and bitter, and that can skew your perception of people and of a nation and of life. So you have some people who, in their poor state or state of loss, they become angry at anything that's Jewish, and they will do certain things. That's not going to get you anywhere. Forgiveness is the key. You have to forgive. And I believe a lot of people in that region needs counseling, because they need to go through the 7 stages of grief and allow themselves to go through that, or else they'll just be in denial or become bitter and just want vengeance. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Then there'll be this constant back and forth. That's not how God intended you guys to exist or to live. He wants us to exist peacefully. Islam is you submit to God in order to find true peace, right? Those who believe God and obey God in the Torah were at peace with God. And Jesus came to reconcile all things to himself so that we can have peace with God. If everybody goes around killing people, a lot of the world will not exist today. And we're here to go through our walk with God and exist peacefully one with another. The 10 Commandments teaches us how to exist peacefully with God, with others, and to have peace with our own soul and self. But if you don't see the spirit, remember the Jews back then, they don't see the spirit of the law, they'll be what? A sinful and adulterous generation. They'll sin. So, Muslim Jews, the Hebraic Jews, and the Messianic Jews can all exist peacefully under one Israel. Okay? They can. But they have to see with the truth about each other, forgive each other, love one another. Or else it's going to be peace, peace, all these ceasefires, and then sudden destruction. Who wants to live like that? So I share this with you. Some people may not agree with me. And remember, some people may be on the extreme, especially as a Jew. They may hate me and want to kill me. But read it for yourself. Read it for yourself. Look through history yourself. Look into things yourself. Ponder the paths of life before you're hasty and being quick to anger, quick to wrath, and quick to murder. Because I'm mixed. On my dad's side, I sought the Lord, because Americans, many melanated people born in America, they don't know where their ancestors came from. So I sought the Lord, because they tell us about Africa over here, right? Everybody's supposed to come from Africa. But then I sought the Lord, what nation or our African nation did my ancestors come from? And what I saw was Ethiopian. I was led to Ethiopian and Sabaean twice, and Ethiopian 4 times. And then when I look into what is Ethiopian, many of those Ethiopians are mixed Arabs, mixed Indian, mixed Chinese people who migrated to the continent Africa. And the Ethiopian kingdom spanned what? Present day Djibouti, present day Eritrea. I'm not sure if it went down all the way to Somalia, Somaliland, but it does look so. And it was also it connected to the Arabian Peninsula. And the Sabaeans, they were Arabs. So, and present day Ethiopia, they migrate. India, Arabs, Israelis migrate, and many of them migrate across the equator. Look at them. Look at the Jamaicans. You have Ethiopian Jews in Jamaica. They call themselves Rastafarians, right? I never paid much attention to the Rastafarians, but they're not lying. King Solomon more than likely copulated with Queen Sheba, considering King Solomon's approach to women: 700 wives, 300 concubines. Right? So you have the connection between the tribe of Judah and Arabs, and you have mixed Indians. It's just mixture. And then when you look at the flags, look at Kenya, look at the UAE's flag, and you go across and you see even the people, some of the people across the nations, Somalia, Somaliland. Brethren. So that's my dad's side. And he's English too, because Walton is English. English mixed. Then my mom's side, Scottish, Chinese, Indian, Portuguese. And the Portuguese went in that area of the Arabian Peninsula into the UAE too. Brethren. So we all need to exist peacefully. That's the way I see it. There can be one Israel where Muslim Jews and the Hebraic Jews are respected, or the Judaic Jews are respected, whichever way you want to see it. They can all get jobs. They don't have to be oppressed. They don't have to be disrespected, murdered, or whatever. None of that. One get paid more than the other. No. But if you don't believe in that, then there's going to be peace, and sudden destruction until Armageddon. That's all. But there are many Americans that are not in agreement with this war in Iran. Like Mr. Trump and himself, and whatever circle that agreed with doing whatever that is, that's probably like at least 1% of the United States of America. He does not represent the whole of the United States of America. And you're going to just have this war and back and forth. So that's pretty much it. Because I think that these European or uh, German Jews who fled uh, Europe could have came in peacefully, could have dealt with their brethren in a peaceful way, could seek to understand Islam before judging it and hating it. And when I mentioned, hey, Moses came up with the bill of divorcement, I say that too. And Paul came up with certain things, and I believe he will let you know this didn't come from the Holy Ghost. So you have leaders who will say things. Even Muhammad would say things, and it didn't come from God. Some things he said did not come from God. But the things that would come from God would be for our peace. Because God is about peace. He's the God of peace, the Prince of Peace. How else would the world exist if we did not exist with love and peace one for another and for God? And so I will end it on that note. And that's where I stand on the issue. Because God would help me to see certain things about Islam. Because, here in the United States after 9/11, they'll have this stereotype or prejudice, whatever it is, they'll try to your mind like, oh, stay away from Muslims or Islam or whatever. But God is not like that. In all thy getting, get understanding. A lot of the Sharia, they're against Sharia. And there are different interpretations and types of Sharia. But because you have the UAE and certain nations that they're not like about the radical or strict enforcement or I guess consequences for your actions, Sharia. But much of the Sharia, where do they get their knowledge from? It's the Torah. But if they don't look into it to see it, they're just gonna, hey, people fail for a lack of knowledge. And the more you lack knowledge, the more you fight, the more you will have misunderstanding, the more there will be divisiveness and try to divide us. And that's where I stand on this.